His property should be inherited by me and my child, right? After all, I was his wife, and this child is his offspring. A woman I didn't know suddenly appeared amid my grief over my son's death in a traffic accident. I was utterly shocked by her sudden demands. Then, as if out of nowhere, she made unreasonable remarks about the inheritance. I was shaken by the reality that I had to hand over my precious son's assets to her. But the shocking truth turned out to be on her part. I am Susan, turning 50 this year. I have a son and a daughter in their 20s, and my husband passed away a few years ago. Recently, my son died in a traffic accident. I currently live with my daughter but haven't been in touch with my son for several years. Therefore, the news of the accident was a huge shock to me. If only I had known this would happen, I would have talked more with my son. It's too late now for regrets and wishing for more time together. Mom, stay strong. Supported by my daughter, we somehow finished my son's funeral. A woman showed up when the family was resting alone after the mourners, including friends and acquaintances to whom my son had been indebted, had left. Tony. Why? Oh my God. A stranger, about the same age as my son, shouted his name and appeared with a small child, about 2 or 3 years old. She burst into tears in front of my son's portrait, collapsing in loud sobs. But none of us relatives knew her, and we were all surprised by her. Who is this woman? Could she be an acquaintance of my son? Perhaps a close friend. Excuse me, who are you? Are you Tony's friend? The next moment, the woman's unexpected reply made me doubt my ears. Actually, I am Tony's wife. What? My surprise was immeasurable. I had never heard from Tony about getting married. I believed he was still single. The relatives around, of course, my daughter too, all showed faces of surprise like mine. I thought Tony was unmarried. I don't mean to be rude, but could you be mistaken about the person? I had to confirm the facts first. I asked her as calmly as I could. No, it's not a mistake. Tony is my husband. This is the wedding ring he gave me. And this is a photo from our marriage. And this is our child. On the screen of the smartphone she showed, there was undoubtedly a photo of Tony and her, standing side by side, happily showing their rings. And the ring she was wearing on her ring finger had the same design. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Even though we hadn't been in touch for a few years, would a child not tell their marriage to their parents? But Tony is no longer in this world. I couldn't confirm the truth with him, and I couldn't decide whether her story was true or not. Furthermore, the young child she claimed to be Tony's. The child's face somewhat resembled Tony. Having just lost my son, I couldn't help but feel nostalgia and affection, seeing the resemblance of my young son in that child. It's hard to believe all this so suddenly. Amid the whirlwind of emotions inside me, I heard my daughter's serious voice. Looking at my daughter's face, she clearly doubted the woman who appeared suddenly. Well, whether you believe it or not, this is the truth. If you really are Tony's wife, we will check with the municipal office. That way, we can quickly find out the truth. Hearing this, the woman averted her eyes, seeming troubled. Actually, we are already divorced. Divorced? Yes, we separated after a short time, but we definitely were married. The woman, now revealed to be an ex-wife, continued to insist that she was once Tony's wife. Then, what about this child? This is Tony and my child. According to her, the child by her side was Tony's, which means my grandchild. Tony married, divorced, and even had a grandchild. I had never imagined such a situation. I couldn't think straight. I'm sorry, but I can't believe it right away. It's all so sudden. May I verify the facts? Of course, please do. I had to verify the facts first. After explaining to her and getting her consent, I decided to let her go for the day. Once the funeral was over and I felt a bit calmer, I asked my daughter to obtain Tony's family registry from the municipal office. Indeed, as the woman claimed, there was a record of marriage between Tony and her. I can't believe Tony really was married to her. When did brother do all this? Her story turned out to be true. She really was Tony's ex-wife. As a mother, I was shocked not to have been informed about such a significant event in my son's life. But Mom, don't you find something odd about her? Think about it. She never tells their marriage or even childbirth to us, who would be her in-laws. And now, she suddenly shows up at the funeral without any prior notice, at a place where we and other relatives are gathered. Moreover, with a small child? Especially as an ex-wife, it would be too awkward to do something like this. Indeed, it seemed somewhat strange for her to suddenly appear before our family with whom she had never communicated or interacted before. But she must be grieving Tony's death as well. Maybe she came despite feeling awkward. I don't think she's a bad person at heart. I couldn't think negatively of her for having the courage to appear at her ex-husband's funeral. There might be some reason why she didn't tell us about their marriage, divorce, and having a child. I also thought about the child she brought. If indeed the child was between Tony and her, then that child would be my first grandchild. The child who hugged me at the funeral and asked, "Grandma, are you crying? Are you okay?" reminded me of Tony. The adorable appearance of the child comforted my heart, grieving the loss of my son. I wanted to believe that this cute child was my grandchild. All right. But I will investigate until I am convinced. Saying this, my daughter went as far as to hire a detective to investigate Tony's ex-wife. A few days later, my daughter brought surprising results. Mom. She was lying after all. That child isn't Tony's. According to the investigation, it was true that there was a marital history between Tony and her, but it lasted only for about 3 months. This matched her story, but the issue was the timing of their marriage. They were married about a year ago. However, the child she brought was about 2 to 3 years old. Logically, if the child were truly Tony's, the child would be less than a year old. The child was born at a time when it was impossible to be his. This means that the child was likely born to another man. Is that so? Susan, are you sleeping okay? Are you all right? Yes, thank you. I'm managing somehow. Weeks passed since Tony's funeral. Relatives living nearby often visited my home, offering comforting words. But what was the real identity of that woman? She suddenly appeared, claiming to be Tony's ex-wife. Yes, it was true that she was his ex-wife. But I haven't heard anything from her since then. I see. Hopefully, no issues arise. The fact that she was an ex-wife turned out to be true, but there had been no contact from her since, and my daughter seemed satisfied with the investigation, so the topic of the woman naturally faded away. Amidst the busy days, I had almost forgotten about her. But then, one day, she appeared at my house again with the child. And, with little greeting, she broached a topic that puzzled me. So, about Tony's inheritance. What? I wasn't sure if an ex-wife had any rights to the inheritance of her deceased ex-husband. Not being familiar with these matters, I didn't know what to say. However, my daughter spoke out in a clearly irritated tone. Wow, you're quite bold to come here saying that. Indeed, the inheritance is important, but my mother hasn't yet overcome my brother's death. You were crying so much at the funeral, but it seems you have already moved on. I apologize. But I thought it would be better to decide on these matters sooner rather than later. Indeed, there might be some logic in her words. However, discussing inheritance when not even 6 months have passed and when relatives are not gathered seemed inappropriate. Her words and actions felt discordant to me. Unfortunately for you, as an ex-wife, you don't have any inheritance rights to my brother's estate. Really? Is that true? I was surprised by my daughter's assertiveness. The ex-wife seemed momentarily startled but quickly retorted. But, this child is Tony's, so there should be inheritance rights, right? Saying this, she pulled the child, who bore a resemblance to Tony, closer to her side. Certainly, if that child is the offspring of my brother and you, there would be inheritance rights. Exactly. She appeared confident. However, my daughter, without changing her expression, posed a question. But that child isn't my brother's, is he? What are you talking about? This child is definitely Tony and my child. No, that's not true. I'm sorry, but I couldn't just accept your claim, so I had to investigate a little into your background. Saying this, my daughter presented the documents of the investigation she had commissioned from a detective agency. Your marriage with my brother lasted only 3 months about a year ago, didn't it? This child is clearly older than 1 year. It's hard to believe he's my brother's child, isn't it? That's. I was in a relationship with Tony, and this child was born before we got married. Then, after giving birth, we registered our marriage a while later. She was desperately trying to assert that the child was Tony's. But my daughter continued in a calm tone. But you were married to another man before my brother, right? For 4 years, until half a year before your marriage with my brother. Considering the child's age, isn't he the child of that man? My daughter had thoroughly investigated her background as well. Faced with my daughter's remarks, the woman showed a perplexed expression and sighed heavily. Indeed, this child was born to former husband before I married Tony. But what does that matter? What are you saying? The woman admitted that the child was not Tony's and seemed defiant. I was infuriated to learn she had lied to us. I had thought she was a kind ex-wife mourning Tony, but her lies and betrayal deeply disappointed me. Even if the child wasn't my grandchild, I was happy she brought a cute child. My feelings of trust in her quickly turned cold. This child is listed as Tony's in the family registry. Even if he's a stepchild, he should have inheritance rights. Even now, she continues to strongly assert her claim to the inheritance. My daughter then informed her of a crucial fact. I think there's a misunderstanding. Have you and my brother completed the adoption process for that child? If he's a child from a former husband, without legal adoption, he wouldn't be recognized as having parental rights under the law. Meaning, no inheritance rights either. My daughter asserted this, having already confirmed it with a lawyer. At these words, my son's ex-wife became visibly unsettled. But, yes, that's right. We were discussing adoption. We were going to become a family. So this child is. Enough. Tony's inheritance will never go to you. My anger reached its peak at her reasoning. I had believed her intentions were for Tony, but they were actually for his inheritance. The child I thought resembled Tony was someone else's, merely bearing a coincidental resemblance. This realization pained and angered me. If there's any more trouble, I'll report it to the police. As I said this, her complexion changed. The police? If you don't leave, I'll report it. As I firmly stated this, she quickly left with the child. Are you okay, Mom? My daughter said this and gently rubbed my back. Yes, I'm okay. Thank you for looking into everything. It helped me face reality. It's okay, Mom. But to think Tony married someone like that. He really had no eye for women, disappointing. Ha ha ha, you're right. I smiled back at my daughter's light-hearted joke, despite the ache in my heart. Gradually, I began to return to my everyday life. The sorrow of losing Tony was still not entirely healed. However, as time passed and after Tony's memorial service, I began to find some peace. The issue of inheritance was resolved, and since Tony was unmarried and had no children, my daughter and I were the inheritors. There had been no contact from Tony's ex-wife since then, and our life continued peacefully. As time passed and the first anniversary of Tony's death approached, my daughter shared some happy news. Mom, we've decided to get married. She introduced her boyfriend to me right then. He was a very sincere young man, nervously asking for my blessing to marry my daughter. The calm and gentle atmosphere between them reassured me. I've properly introduced him and everything, so you're okay with it, right, Mom? Haha, of course. I wish you two all the happiness. The fact that Tony had married without telling anyone had become something we could now joke about. It no longer saddened me to remember it. Also, there's one more thing. I'm pregnant. My daughter was expecting a child. I was honestly surprised by this sudden development. But seeing how happy the two of them were, I had nothing to say. And, since I'm anxious about being a first-time parent and I don't want you to be lonely, would you like to live with us? My daughter made the offer with a shy smile, her boyfriend nodding in agreement beside her. I was grateful for my daughter's thoughtfulness and happily accepted. Of course, I answered, excited about the new phase of life ahead of me. I needed to stay energetic for what's to come.